Hey everybody, this is Dr. Maples. We're here with our final lecture on sampling. We've talked about probability, non-probability samples. We've talked about some of the things to think about in establishing a sample and some basic terminology, things like generalization and population and sample and pizza and slice. Got that in there one last time. Well, now what I want to do is talk about some of the things to think about. One of the things that as a sociologist I hope is that you leave the university starting to take a little more note about the things that you read and how accurate they are. One of the things that I find as a researcher is that sociology has me constantly checking sampling procedures in studies, in news articles, and more. And I really use those to maybe cast some shade on how accurate these results really and truly are. A good example of this is, let's pretend we have a news article that cites 6 people from Twitter. Is that representative of the US population? No, but it doesn't stop some media sources from saying that it is. This is something to think about. One of the things that I want you to do as you start reading studies, both in this class perhaps, but certainly as we start working on your senior theses in the 470 class, is start to think about if the studies you're reading really have representative results that can be described to the whole population. You can read how researchers have sampled their particular study in the methodology section, and you'll be able to understand like where they got their cases and if it feels like it's truly representative of what they're saying it is. What often happens is we see people take a sample and then make really grandiose arguments about it. Like, I took this sample of 50 rock climbers in the Red River Gorge, and this applies to all climbers. No, it does not. It is a sample that you took of Red River Gorge climbers. Maybe it represents Red River Gorge climbers, but we can't say that it represents all climbers on the planet, and especially the ones that aren't on the planet. I don't know who they may be. We'll leave that for another day. But we want to make sure that the sampling that we're looking at in these other people's studies is reliable, is that it makes sense. In fact, you can start to catch these things really quickly. You'll be like, I don't know, that doesn't feel necessarily representative. And you may be right. Trust your gut. Have confidence to trust that. Likewise, one of the other things that I like to do in sampling when I'm reading other studies is question what other groups they have there that might not have been represented. One of the things to remember is that you already have a certain level of error that's introduced into some samples because certain people are more likely to give you their opinion than others. And that in and of itself can sometimes be an underrepresented group. In outdoor recreation, I find that I have certain demographics that are far more interested in giving me their very abrasive opinions sometimes, and that's okay. But nonetheless, I also have to remember that when I'm thinking about my sampling and making arguments about generalizing my results to other cases. Likewise, too, it's useful to think about the process that the researcher used, and if they talk about samples being probability or non-probability, or they just glaze over that. When they glaze over that, that kind of becomes a concern to me. Or if they try to treat a non-probability sample as a probability sample, that becomes a problem. These are some things to start watching for as you look at samples in other studies. And again, I can't stress this enough. When you are presented with information that uses statistics and samples, question it. Take a moment and look at it and say, is this really representative? And again, think about the fact that when we have really small samples, we're really dealing with non-probability samples because 1, 2, 3 people might represent a group of 10, but it's definitely not going to represent a group of 10,000 or even millions. So question it, and it's okay to question it, by the way. You have permission to do that. Now, a couple of other things that I want to think about. I often get asked the question, what is a good sample size anyways? I have a very disappointing answer because I remember I was disappointed when I asked that question of Dr. Jones all those many years ago when I was taking this class. There really is no good answer to this. When we are talking about sampling size, for non-probability cases, you have nothing to worry about because it's a non-probability sample. So you do what works for you and what your resources and time allow. And if it feels like you need more in the future, then maybe you wrap up the study by saying larger study is warranted. We need a more representative sample. Or if you have time, you could always just conduct more cases. Probability samples, you do need to think about this, and you can actually work out a representative sample size based on how confident you want to be. The good news here is that if you know the population, how many people are in the pizza, you can actually determine with 95% levels of confidence how big your sampling should be. And actually, I've included a link on this PowerPoint, but a simple Google will turn up many results as well of sampling size calculators. You can get both an estimate of how many cases you need for it to be expectedly representative of a population of a particular size. You can plug those numbers in. Let me say all that again. You can get an estimate of how many cases you need based on population size for it to be representative. Or alternatively, you can actually find certain calculators that will tell you, based on this population, you need at least a sample size of this, so we think you need to send surveys to this many people because we expect this percentage of people won't respond to the survey. So you can really get those things into effect, and I'm here to tell you, they're easy to use, they're logical, and often they give you the instructions of what you need to do. And they're also something too that you can actually change based on the kind of studies that you're needing. Maybe you don't need a 95% level of confidence that you're representing. Maybe a smaller sample will be okay. And then you can have a smaller sample. Nonetheless, I want to say, first off, sampling is important, but don't get bogged down in it. Conduct your study. It's okay to do non-probability sampling. Just do your best. If we don't know much about the population, we don't have the resources, or we don't have the time to do a bigger study, you do what you can do. But do your study. Don't let sampling stand in the way of it. Because you can always, when you're finishing up that paper, point out, hey, I'd really like it if we had another 300 cases in here. And that's okay. Now, when it comes to doing those probability samples, you can use those probability calculators that are all over the internet, including the one that I linked in the PowerPoint, to know exactly how many cases you want. And if you get short of that, that's okay too, because you can still say, hey, we fell just short of a full sample here, but we're close. We can still treat this as a non-probability sample, but we are pretty close to being a statistically sound probability sample. Again, don't let this bog you down. Just do your best. Now, take a breath, because I have happy news. The basics were done. The basic ideas of how to do studies, you've learned all of them. This is pretty much all the stuff that you need to do the kind of work that I, as a PhD, do. Things like research methods don't really change. They just become more involved, and the samples become bigger or more detailed. But you know all the basics of how to do a study, coming from building a research question that's sociological, to using theory, to building hypotheses, to creating variables, and more. So now, what we're going to do for the next 4 lectures is focus on specific methodological approaches. We're going to talk about specific ways of collecting data. Now, I want to give you a heads up. We do 4 of these, and you're going to have a chance through 2 assignments in this class, and they're big point assignments, so you need to make sure you do them, to pick 2 of the 4 ways that we talk about and create a study. You won't actually have to do the study in full. You're not going to write up a whole study, but what you're going to do is build the study. My main thing that I'm hoping to see through those is that you understand the basics of these methodologies, that you can build a sociological research question, and that most importantly, you can build and set up to test your own hypotheses. If you can do all of those things, you've achieved what we want to achieve in this class. These 3 super important and not necessarily easy ideas. So that's what we're going to build up to. Now, again, there's going to be 4 options: surveys, interviews, observations, and context analysis. It's 4 different options that you're going to have that you can do, and you're going to choose 2 of them. And that assignment's going to be up on Blackboard. In fact, it's probably already there when you're watching this video. So you'll have those options available. You're going to do this twice. You're going to do, say, for example, 1 on surveys and 1 on observations, or maybe you want to do 1 on interviews and 1 on the context analyses. That's okay. You get to choose, but you do 2 of them, of the 4. So that's where we're going to be working on for the next couple of weeks. Now, I have to be clear. If you need help, if you feel hopelessly lost, if you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing, come to me. My job as a professor is to help you, to make sure that you succeed. And if you need the help, that's what I'm here to do. Or if you just want advice, this is where open office hours are great, or email me to set up an appointment. I'm happy to meet with you. Likewise, too, if you just have questions about your design, say you're building a survey and you want some feedback on it, write me. That's what I'm here to do. Even though we're learning in an online environment, it doesn't change the fact that you and I can communicate just as well over email and over Zoom and over Collaborate. We can still work. It's just we're not in the same room. So it's the same situation. If you need help, I'm here to help. If you want advice, if you want suggestions, if you need information, you just ask me. Otherwise, I will see you in our next lecture series where we do one of my favorite things, and that is building surveys, something that sociologists, I say, do better than anybody else out there. And it's also a cool way for you as an undergraduate or a graduate to pay your rent. So we'll talk about that more in a moment. I'll see you later. Take care.